The world was once a place, without time, without light, without a single sound. Before memory, before the first dawn, before even the idea of life, there was only a silent ocean of fire. The young earth spun through darkness, glowing like a small sun. Its surface was a sea of molten rock, broken by storms of metal rain. Mountains rose and melted again in the same moment. Rivers of liquid stone flowed across endless plains. The air itself was poison, thick with smoke, ash, and gas. Yet beneath that chaos, something ancient was waiting to be born. For millions of years, nothing living moved upon this world. No sound of wings, no whisper of leaves. Only thunder that never stopped, lightning that flashed across boiling clouds, and meteors that fell like rain. The earth was still dreaming, shaping itself in silence, building the bones of the world that would one day hold oceans, forests, and human cities. But even in that endless storm, change had already begun. Deep inside the molten crust, strange crystals formed, tiny patterns of order in the middle of chaos. Each one carried a secret of what would come, the first memory of stability, the first sign of peace. Then, slowly, the fires began to fade. The surface cooled. The red oceans turned black and hard. Volcanoes rose like giants and breathed out steam that gathered into clouds. The first rains fell, not for minutes or days, but for centuries. They hissed against the hot ground, carving rivers and valleys, creating the first oceans. Those early seas were thick and strange, filled with minerals and chemicals, colored in shades no human eye will ever see. From the darkness of the deep came the first whisper of life's future. At first, there was only chemistry, a dance of atoms and energy. Lightning struck again and again, splitting the air, fusing elements together, creating something new. Small invisible shapes began to form in the warm waters, simple structures made of carbon and light. They were not alive, not yet, but they were close, and then somewhere in that vast silence the spark happened. It wasn't an explosion or a miracle. It was a small accident, a quiet connection between two molecules that began to copy themselves. That tiny act, so fragile, so unimportant, would one day become everything. The first hint of life had arrived. It did not know what it was. It did not know it was beginning history. It only knew how to survive, to multiply, to continue. From that moment forward, Earth was no longer a dead planet. It had learned to breathe. For millions of years, those invisible builders worked in secret. They fed on minerals and sunlight, shaping the oceans into living factories. The sky was still dark, filled with gases unfit for breath, but the process had begun. Slowly, life was making the planet its home. Imagine it, the world covered in endless storm clouds, lightning flashing across black seas, volcanoes glowing at the horizon, and under that chaos, tiny living things floating in the water, multiplying in silence, no sound, no movement visible from above. Yet the greatest transformation in the universe was happening right there. The earth was creating itself again, not through fire, but through life. In time, these simple forms began to leave traces behind. They changed the chemistry of the oceans. They began to release gases, some deadly, some precious. They were preparing the way for all the creatures that would come after, though none of them knew it. The earth had entered a new kind of dream, a living dream. Still, it was not a peaceful world. Asteroids still struck from the blackness of space, tearing craters miles wide. Mountains rose and crumbled. Whole oceans boiled away, only to return again through endless rain. Yet life endured, hiding in the cracks of rocks, deep in the underwater vents where heat and darkness met. Each day, the planet became a little more stable, a little more alive. Each storm passed and something remained. The first continents began to rise, dark and bare, shaped by rivers and wind. There were no plants, no animals, no sound, but the endless hiss of wind and water. But already the earth had a pulse. Somewhere, deep beneath those ancient waves, a single cell divided, and then another. It was the beginning of everything that would ever be. Forests, birds, beasts, and one day humans. And yet none of that was known. The planet simply continued to dream. It is strange to think that the ground beneath our feet was once liquid fire, that the air we breathe was once poison, that the oceans that cradle life were born from storms that never stopped. Earth had been forged in destruction. Yet from that destruction came the first hope of creation. Every stone, every drop of water, every breath we take is part of that same ancient story. The story of how the earth turned from chaos into calm, from silence into sound, from dream into life. And though billions of years have passed, if you listen closely, when the night is still and the wind moves through the trees, you can almost hear it again. The slow, steady heartbeat of a world still dreaming, because even now, after all this time, Earth remembers. It remembers the fire. It remembers the rain. It remembers the dream that began before humans awoke. The world had cooled, but it was still restless. The land was dark and barren, silent except for the endless roar of waves. Above it hung a sky of deep red clouds, heavy with steam and lightning. No birds flew there. No sound of life stirred the air. But below, in the newborn oceans, something was beginning to move. At first it was almost nothing. Small patterns, tiny structures, built of dust, gas, and energy. They drifted through the warm water, joining and breaking apart, again and again. For millions of years, the oceans were a restless experiment, a great cauldron of creation. Every wave carried the ingredients of life, though no one was there to see it. And then one day, something impossible happened. In the deep stillness, a fragile shape began to copy itself. It wasn't thought or will, it was instinct built into the laws of nature. That single spark would change everything. From that first act of self-creation came life. It was small, so small it could not be seen by any eye that would exist for another billion years. But it was alive. It could divide, grow, and survive. That one invisible spark would someday fill oceans, skies, and forests. It was the first dream made real. The oceans became the world's first cradle. They were vast and endless, stretching from horizon to horizon, glittering with light from volcanic fires. Inside them floated tiny, delicate forms, cells, filaments, bubbles of life, each learning to use sunlight and water to make energy. Some fed on minerals rising from deep vents on the seafloor. Others fed on light. They were silent builders, shaping the earth molecule by molecule. The planet itself seemed to breathe with them. Gases changed, currents flowed differently, and the oceans slowly turned from poison to possibility. But it was not an easy world. Every step forward came with struggle. Lightning storms tore across the surface, boiling sections of ocean. Meteors still rained from the skies, sending shockwaves through the sea. Each time life began to spread, it was nearly erased. But something in it refused to stop. Each time it died, it found a new way to return. This persistence, this quiet defiance, became the nature of life itself. In the darkness of deep water, tiny creatures learned to gather around warmth. They clung to the cracks in volcanic stone, feeding on the minerals rising from the Earth's core. Around them, chemical fire and black smoke twisted like ribbons in the cold. Yet within that harshness, life flourished. Imagine it, no sound, no light, no movement, but the slow drifting of microscopic clouds. Each cell dividing again and again, filling the ocean drop by drop. It was a world of small miracles, repeated billions of times. And then something new began. Some cells learned to work together. They formed colonies, simple partnerships at first, then more complex ones. Together, they built tiny structures, thin as threads, that floated in the sunlight near the surface. For the first time, life began to shape the world around it. They absorbed sunlight, releasing invisible gases that began to fill the air. Slowly, gently, the atmosphere began to change. The sky that had once been orange and toxic started to turn blue. The oceans grew clearer. The planet was learning to breathe. For the first time, Earth had a rhythm, a pulse that beat with every rise of the tide and fall of the sun. But beneath that calm beauty, danger still waited. Volcanic eruptions could block the sun for centuries. The seas could freeze or boil. Entire generations of living things vanished overnight. Yet through every disaster, a few always survived, hidden deep below, in cracks of rock or dark vents, where heat and chemicals never stopped flowing. They were life's guardians, the silent witnesses of every new beginning. Time passed in silence, measured not by days or years, but by ages. Continents shifted, the oceans deepened. The chemistry of the world grew richer. Each new generation of cells carried more memory than the last, patterns that would one day become the foundation of everything from forests to cities. But in these early ages, life had no eyes, no mouths, no thought. It simply was. It drifted, it divided, it waited, and above the world remained empty. No footsteps touched the land. No birds crossed the sky. Only the whisper of waves and the endless rhythm of tides. Still, the oceans were not alone. The stars above shone cold and steady, watching the slow awakening below. Each night, meteors burned across the sky, carrying minerals from the void, adding to the planet's story, one spark at a time. It was as if the universe itself was helping, giving Earth what it needed to continue the dream. Then somewhere in those endless waters, a new kind of life appeared, smarter, stronger, and more complex. It began to consume others, feeding, changing, growing. It was no longer content just to survive. It wanted more. The age of simple life was ending. A new kind of struggle was about to begin, one that would shape every living thing that ever existed. But for now, the oceans still whispered softly. Carrying the breath of the first living world, they held the memory of beginnings, of storms and calm, of the moment when lifeless water learned to sing. And if you listen closely, when the waves move against the shore, you can still hear it. The slow, ancient song of a planet learning to live. Because before we walked, before we dreamed, before humans awoke, the oceans were already dreaming for us. At first it seemed like a quiet change. The oceans shimmered under a red sky as they always had. The small living things continued to divide and feed, floating through warm, gentle tides. But in the heart of those cells, something extraordinary was happening. They had found a new way to survive, a new way to make energy. Instead of feeding on the heat of volcanic vents or the chemicals in the water, they began to use light, sunlight. They learned to catch it, break it apart, and turn it into life. And as they worked, they released something new into the air, something invisible, something dangerous, and something that would one day give breath to every living being. They created oxygen. At first, it was a gift the planet didn't know how to accept. Oxygen was strange and violent. It reacted with everything it touched. The rocks began to rust, turning the seabed a deep red. Metals corroded. Gases in the sky began to shift. The world was changing at a pace unseen in all of time before. The creators didn't know what they had done. They simply floated, continued their ancient rhythm, multiplying and shining in the sunlight. The oceans became alive with their color, green and blue patches spreading across the surface like delicate paint. But while some life celebrated this new power, others began to die. The early world had been filled with creatures that lived in darkness, beings that could not bear the sharp, burning bite of oxygen. As the air thickened with this new gas, they began to vanish, choking in the very oceans that had given them birth. Entire lineages disappeared, erased without a trace. It was the first great extinction in Earth's history, a quiet apocalypse unfolding over millions of years. And yet, from that destruction came something magnificent. The air began to clear. The sky, once dim and red, slowly turned blue. Sunlight struck the surface of the sea in bright gold. The planet looked up at the universe for the first time with a clear gaze. Life, too, transformed. The survivors learned to use oxygen instead of fearing it. It gave them strength, speed, and energy beyond anything that had existed before. The age of breath had begun, but even now, the Earth was far from calm. Volcanoes still burned at the edges of the world, painting the skies with ash. Asteroids still fell from space, turning oceans to steam and shaking continents that were only just forming. Each time the planet found peace, chaos returned to remind it that creation and destruction were never truly separate. In this endless dance of death and rebirth, life grew stronger, cells began to combine again, building new forms, layered, complex, capable of movement. Some learned to stretch, to bend, to sense the world around them. Others grew within protective shells, learning patience and endurance. The first great partnerships were formed, cells joining to create something greater than themselves. It was a fragile alliance, but it would lead to all future creatures, plants, animals, and one day, humans. For the first time, the oceans were not silent. They shimmered with unseen motion, tiny beings drifting, consuming, changing, and releasing breath into the world above. The sky grew richer in oxygen, and with it, the air became a stage for new possibilities. But this power came with a shadow, oxygen, while life-giving was also destructive. It burned, it corroded, it punished weakness. Life had to adapt or die. The balance of creation and death became the rhythm of the planet, a rhythm that still beats in every heart today. As the world adjusted, something began to glow in the dark waters. Tiny organisms released faint light, flickering like stars beneath the sea. These were the first bioluminescent creatures, living lanterns in the eternal night. Their glow marked the first beauty born from struggle, the first light created not by fire, but by life itself. Imagine the ancient ocean then, endless darkness lit by scattered sparks, drifting like constellations through the deep. Above them the sky was blue and vast. Below, the planet hummed with silent energy. Earth was beginning to breathe in rhythm with its own creation. The age of breath and shadow was a time of contrast. Life and death, growth and decay, light and dark. Every gain was bought with loss. Every birth was followed by silence. But through it all, the dream continued, and with every breath of oxygen that filled the air, the stage was being set for something even more extraordinary, because in the depths of those oceans, some of the living things were beginning to change again. They were building shapes that could move, reach, and respond. They were learning to sense. Soon, eyes would open for the first time. Soon the world would no longer be blind. The age of breath and shadow was ending. The age of sight was about to begin. The oceans had grown clear and alive. Sunlight pierced the waters now, spreading golden paths through the blue. The air was clean, rich with breath. The earth had transformed, yet it was still not ready for eyes. Before sight, before sound, before movement came a long, silent age of giants. They were not giants as we imagine, no claws, no bones, no faces. They were soft, shapeless, and strange. They drifted across the seabed like living clouds, feeding on the light that filtered down, or the chemicals that seeped from deep within the earth. They ruled a world without fear. Imagine it, an ocean without predators, without chase, without death by tooth or claw. Every creature simply existed, touching, drifting, absorbing. The seafloor was covered with forests of soft life, mats of living tissues that waved gently with the current. They were the first giants, the first to build bodies large enough to be seen. Some stretched across the seafloor like vast carpets. Others rose like towers, branching into delicate shapes. There were discs, fronds, ribbons, spirals, bodies made of soft jelly and water, as if the ocean itself had decided to take form. This was the Ediacaran world, a time when life was simple but immense. The earth had finally found peace. No storms of fire, no oceans of poison, no struggle for survival, yet for tens of millions of years, these creatures drifted and pulsed in stillness. They absorbed sunlight through their thin skins. They filtered minerals from the water. They lived without hunger, without fear, without sight. And yet something was changing. Something silent and invisible. Deep in the shadows of the ocean floor, smaller, harder creatures began to appear. Tiny things with shells, with mouths, with purpose. They were restless, fast, and hungry. They were the beginning of something new. The first hunters. The giants did not know it, but their world was ending. Far above, the continents shifted and cracked. The earth was restless again. Volcanoes filled the sky with ash and the oceans darkened. The temperature dropped. The great soft beings struggled to survive in the changing light. The world that had once been calm was now stirring toward motion. In the deep, simple life was becoming complex. The small, shelled creatures began to move, crawling, digging, searching. They left trails in the mud, signs of curiosity and hunger. These trails would one day become the first fossils of movement, proof that life had learned to explore. The giants, blind and peaceful, remained still. They had never known fear, and so they did not hide. They continued to drift while the new world formed around them, but life does not wait for peace. Slowly, the balance began to shift. The smaller creatures multiplied faster, evolved quicker. They learned to sense vibrations, the faint ripples of a nearby presence. They developed simple nerves, tiny muscles, and primitive instincts. And then, one day, the first act of hunting began. It was not planned. There was no intent. One tiny creature brushed against another and found that it could feed. The moment it did, the world changed forever. The age of innocence ended. For the first time, life had turned against itself. Predator and prey were born together. The soft-bodied giants could not fight back. They had no armor, no speed, no eyes to see danger coming. One by one, their kind began to vanish, fading into the sands of the sea. The ocean grew darker, filled with motion and struggle. Every creature now had something to fear. Yet in this quiet disaster, evolution found its greatest spark. The new predators forced the survivors to adapt. Life began to grow stronger, smarter, more complex. The fragile giants disappeared, but from their fall came diversity, creativity, and the drive to evolve. The ocean was no longer a peaceful dream. It had become a living battlefield. Still, the memory of the giants remained. They left behind patterns in stone, faint impressions of their soft forms, pressed forever into ancient mud. Those fossils are all that remain of their world, shapes that look like leaves, discs and feathers, though they were none of these. When we look at them today, we see ghosts of the first great experiment in life. Creatures that ruled a world without war and vanished when the first shadow of hunger appeared. It is strange to think that before the first eyes opened, the seas were full of beauty, creatures so gentle and quiet that their world left no noise. No scars, only patterns. They were Earth's first dreamers, but the dream could not last. The world was ready to awaken once more, and in the depths of the changing sea, new forms were preparing to rise, bodies built of armor, speed, and sight. The time of the soft giants was ending. The time of sight, teeth, and motion was about to begin. The earth turned again. The continents moved. The light changed. And far beneath the waves, one cell divided into something different, something that could sense light itself. A primitive eye had opened, and with it, the world would never be the same again. The world had slept for billions of years. But now, something had opened its eyes. It began with a flicker, a patch of light-sensing cells that could tell bright from dark. It was simple, fragile, and blind to detail. Yet it changed everything. For the first time in history, life could see. And when life learned to see, it also learned to hunt. The ocean, once a place of drifting peace, suddenly became a battlefield of light and shadow. Creatures that had floated gently for ages now had to hide, to chase, to survive. The world awoke in color, a world of hunters and hunted, of motion and fear. The age of innocence was over. The Cambrian explosion had begun. At first, it seemed like the ocean had gone mad. Everywhere new creatures appeared, not slowly, not quietly, but in a storm of invention. In just a few million years, a heartbeat in Earth's history, the seas filled with forms no one could have imagined before. There were long, spiny worms with mouths like circular saws. There were floating shields with rows of eyes and wings like blades. There were strange, armored beings crawling on clawed legs, their bodies built for both attack and defense. For the first time, life built weapons. For the first time, life built armor. Each day was a struggle. To feed, to flee, to live. Before this, for billions of years, the only danger life knew was the earth itself. Fire, ice, and time. Now the danger came from one another. Tiny predators learned to sense movement in the water. Their new eyes gave them precision. They could tell where light fell and where shadows hid prey. Those that could see survived. Those that could not, vanished. It was a revolution written in motion. Soon eyes became sharper, wider, and more complex. The ocean lit up with vision. For the first time, creatures looked at each other, and the world looked back. The prey adapted too. They grew shells, spines, and tricks of camouflage. Some burrowed beneath the sand. Others learned to swim faster, twisting through the light like silver ribbons. Evolution had found a new rhythm, the rhythm of fear. In this world of chaos, one creature became the symbol of the new age, Anomalocaris, the strange shrimp. It was larger than anything alive before it, a predator nearly a meter long, with two spiked arms for grasping and a circular mouth filled with teeth. Its eyes were compound and enormous, able to see movement across vast distances. It ruled the seas like a shadow. Every ripple, every shimmer of light could mean death. The smaller creatures scattered before it, each new generation evolving to escape. This was not cruelty. It was creation, because through struggle, life was learning. Each act of violence shaped something new. The first nervous systems grew stronger. Reflexes became faster. Brains, once simple clusters of cells, grew larger to process sight and movement. The ocean had become a school of survival. Every heartbeat, every flicker of light was part of the lesson, and yet in all this struggle there was beauty. Coral-like creatures built forests beneath the waves. Worms carved tunnels through the sand, painting strange patterns on the seafloor. Tiny trilobites, armored explorers, crawled everywhere, their segmented bodies glinting in the dim blue light. They were among the first beings to look upon a world full of color and motion. They did not know fear, as we do. They simply followed the rhythm of existence, to live, to eat, to be eaten, to pass on what worked. The Cambrian seas were like a dream made visible, a place of endless invention. Nature tried everything, wings of flesh, shells of glass, spines, jaws and eyes that could see in near darkness. Some designs vanished within centuries. Others became the ancestors of all complex life. From these battles came the blueprint for every creature that would ever exist. Muscles, skeletons, teeth, all born in that single, shining moment in time, and through it all, the earth watched, turning slowly beneath the light of an ancient sun. The planet had no plan, no purpose. Yet through chaos and hunger, something greater was taking shape. Life was no longer drifting in sleep. It was awake, alive, and aware. But even in this age of predators, balance returned. After millions of years of war, the ocean settled again. Some species vanished, others endured. The survivors learned to coexist, a fragile peace built on evolution's endless patience. The first reefs appeared, homes to hundreds of forms of life. The world was rich now, full of color, light, and complexity. The silent giants of the past were gone, but their legacy remained. Every beating heart, every flicker of vision, every instinct to flee or chase, all began here. Still, above the oceans, the land remained empty. The continents were barren rock, carved by wind and rain, but soon life would crawl from the water and claim it. Roots would find soil, leaves would drink sunlight. The ocean had given birth to life. Now life would give birth to the land. The war of eyes and teeth had forged the tools of survival. Now those tools would shape worlds. The next chapter of Earth's dream was waiting, a green one. For hundreds of millions of years, the land had been silent. A world of empty stone and endless wind. There were no footsteps, no whisper of leaves, no breath but the sigh of dust. Yet beneath that silence, something had begun to stir. Tiny green threads crept across the damp edges of rocks. They were fragile, thin as hair, soft as mist, but they carried within them a power older than blood. They were the first plants, and they would change the world forever. It began in the shadows, along the shorelines where the sea kissed the barren land. In that place between water and rock, life made its boldest move. Something reached upward, slowly, patiently, toward the light. It had no voice, no eyes, no fear, but it could drink sunlight. For the first time, life learned to live by light alone, and the land, once silent, began to breathe. At first, it was only green film, slippery mosses and strange, spongy mats. They clung to wet stone, fed by mist and sunlight. But where they grew, they softened the land. They trapped water, broke down rock, and made the first soil. The earth was waking. Over time, taller plants rose from the shallow pools, stems that could stand, leaves that could stretch. They were primitive, rootless, fragile, but they reached higher each generation, like slow green flames. The air began to change. Every breath of sunlight they captured, every drop of air they released, filled the world with something new, oxygen, the same invisible gas that would one day feed fire, lungs, and dreams was now being woven from sunlight by forests that had no voice. The transformation was quiet but unstoppable. Within a few million years, green life spread across the continents like a tide. The grey world of stone became a landscape of colour, mosses, ferns, and towering spore trees unlike anything that exists today. Their roots split rock, their shadows cooled the ground, and the rain that fell became rivers. For the first time, the land had shade. For the first time, the earth smelled of living things. The forests had arrived, vast, humid jungles of strange life stretching for hundreds of miles. Their trunks oozed resin. Their leaves dripped with ancient rain. The air was thick and heavy, full of mist and the slow rhythm of growth. It was not yet a world for humans, not even close, but it was becoming one. Beneath these ancient trees, the first explorers of the land crawled from the water. They were small, soft-bodied creatures, half fish, half something new. Their fins had grown strong from years of pushing through shallow pools. Now those fins became legs. The first steps on land were not taken by bold conquerors, but by creatures struggling to breathe. They gasped, stumbled, and returned to the water again and again. Yet each generation went a little farther. Life had found a new world to fill, and the forests watched in silence. Everywhere, the planet was rewriting itself. Insects the size of birds filled the skies with the hum of wings. Giant dragonflies drifted through the air like living machines. Millipedes longer than a man moved through the ferns, feeding on the endless green. It was a paradise, but one built from struggle, each new life feeding the next. The circle unbroken, and beneath the surface the land trembled with power. Dead trees and fallen ferns sank into the mud, layer upon layer. Over millions of years, that buried life became black stone, the first coal, the stored sunlight of forgotten ages. Even now, when we burn fire, we are burning those ancient forests, the dreams of the Earth's first green world. The sky grew bluer, the air thickened with oxygen. Lightning danced in the storms that rolled across endless jungles, and in that charged air, evolution waited for its next leap, because the forests had not only given life a home, they had given it breath. Now, creatures could grow larger, stronger, and more complex than ever before. Predators began to roam the swamps. Amphibians grew teeth. The land became alive with sound, croaks, buzzes, clicks, and the shuffle of scaled limbs on damp soil. It was no longer a world of silence. It was a living, breathing, dreaming world, and deep within those forests, as the wind moved through the leaves, the earth seemed to hum. A slow, ancient song, the song of growth, of time, of change. Every leaf that opened was a prayer to the sun. Every root that dug into the soil was a promise that life would not return to the sea. The world had climbed from the water and found its voice in green. Soon that voice would roar. Because after the forests, there would come something even more powerful, something that could shake the ground itself. From the roots of the forests would come the age of monsters. The world would soon belong to the Titans, before humans, before mammals, before even the whisper of intelligence. The earth belonged to giants. They ruled the forests, the swamps, and the skies. They were not monsters. They were the natural rulers of a planet still dreaming of what it could become. This was the age of Titans, when the world breathed fire and thunder. When life grew to sizes the earth would never see again, and yet hidden beneath all that power, something fragile and small had begun to change everything. It began in a green twilight, deep forests dripping with mist, where tree trunks rose like pillars and dragonflies with wingspans the size of hawks drifted through the air. In the stillness, something heavy moved. A shadow, a heartbeat. It was the sound of a world that had learned how to grow big. Creatures no longer crawled or scuttled. They walked. They ruled. And they burned the oxygen-rich air like fire in their blood. The earth had awakened its power, but power always comes with a cost. The forests of the Carboniferous age stretched from pole to pole, humid, endless jungles where the air shimmered with heat and mist. Insects had become giants, feeding on the rich oxygen that filled the skies. Millipedes, longer than boats, slithered beneath the roots. Above them, the first true reptiles appeared, cold-blooded, scaly creatures that no longer needed to return to the water. They laid eggs on land, free from the ancient sea's pull. This was the first true conquest of Earth's dry land. These early reptiles were small at first, low to the ground, slow, cautious. But the forests gave them everything they needed, warmth, food, and shelter. Each generation grew bolder, stronger, and as the forests spread, so did the fire. Lightning struck the dense canopy, and flames tore through the world of green. For the first time, the planet burned, but the fire did not destroy, it transformed. It cleared the old and made space for the new. The ashes became soil, and from the smoke came renewal. Even the Earth's destruction was part of its design. Over millions of years, the continents shifted. The once wet jungles dried. Forests gave way to wide plains and red deserts. The air thinned, the oxygen dropped, and many of the great insects and plants vanished. But the reptiles, the children of the sun, thrived. They had learned to survive where others could not, and from these survivors came creatures unlike any the world had ever seen. Legs grew longer, jaws stronger, lungs larger. The Permian world was born, a land of vast deserts, volcanic rage, and towering predators. It was a harsh age, full of beauty and violence. The skies were red, the mountains black with ash, and the ground cracked beneath endless droughts. But life endured. Huge lizard-like creatures roamed the plains, some with armored backs, others with sails of bone to capture the sun's warmth. The oceans, too, had changed. Sharks ruled the depths, and strange, eel-like hunters drifted through dark waters. Every creature was built by fire and endurance. But beneath the surface, deep within the earth, another fire burned, one far more dangerous. Volcanoes erupted across continents. The land split open. Flames and poison gas filled the air for centuries. Rivers turned to acid. The skies went dark. The forests that had built the world turned to ash. It was the end of an age, the Great Dying, the largest extinction in Earth's history. More than 90% of all life vanished. The Titans fell. The world went silent again. For a long time, the Earth was a graveyard. But extinction is not the end. It is the breath before renewal. From the ashes of that darkness, something new began to stir. Small reptiles, survivors hidden in cracks and burrows, began to rise again. They grew stronger, faster, smarter, and from their ranks a new kind of ruler would soon appear. Creatures that walked upright, creatures that hunted in packs, creatures that would one day shake the earth with their steps. The first dinosaurs, the age of Titans, was not over. It was only evolving. And yet, as the first dinosaurs walked beneath a new sun, the earth itself seemed to pause, as if to remember. It had seen fire and flood, giants and silence. It had seen life rise from the sea, crawl onto the land, and build worlds of its own. Now, it was preparing for something greater, a story not of size or strength, but of spirit. Because beyond the dinosaurs, beyond the thunder and teeth, something small and fragile waited to inherit the world. The next dream was already forming in the shadows, a dream of warmth, of memory, of creatures who would one day remember everything that came before, long before the first humans looked up at the stars, before language, before fire. The earth had already lived 1,000 lifetimes. It had burned, drowned, frozen, and bloomed again, each age a heartbeat in its endless dream. And now, from the ashes of its greatest dying, a new dream was beginning, a dream of monsters and miracles, of thunder and memory. This was the age of dinosaurs, and beyond them, the dawn of us, the children of ash and sky. The world was hot again. Vast deserts stretched beneath red suns. Volcanoes glowed like wounds across the horizon, but life, unstoppable as ever, crawled back from the dust. Tiny reptiles scurried between stones. Amphibians returned to the pools. And soon, from among them rose creatures with long necks, claws like spears, and hearts that thundered with power. They were the rulers of a reborn world, creatures that would shake the ground for the next 150 million years. They were the dinosaurs, yet even they were not the end of the dream. They were its middle chapter. The earth flourished again. Forests of ferns and towering conifers spread across the land. Rivers glittered beneath skies filled with winged shapes, the first flying reptiles, gliding on leathery wings that caught the light like ancient silk. In the oceans, creatures as long as ships swam through green water, hunting with sleek grace. The world was full again, a living tapestry of motion and color. But beneath this glory, change was already stirring. Evolution never sleeps. Among the dinosaurs, some species began to shrink, not in weakness but in adaptation. Small, quick creatures darted through the underbrush, warm-blooded and fast-thinking. Their bodies held heat, their hearts beat faster. Their eyes watched the world with new alertness. They were the first mammals, small, secret and clever, while giants ruled above. These tiny survivors lived in shadows, burrowing, hiding. Nursing their young in warmth and silence, the earth had given birth to strength. But it was now nurturing something new, intelligence. Time flowed like a river. Continents drifted, mountains rose, and the air itself changed. Volcanoes came and went. Stars burned and died overhead. Still, life endured, reshaping itself, adapting to every disaster, every change of light and climate. Then one day, after 160 million years of dominance, the sky fell. A rock, 6 miles wide, struck the earth with the force of gods. The forests burned, the seas boiled. The air turned to night, and the age of dinosaurs ended in silence. It was not the end of life, only another turning of the page. In the shadow of destruction, the small creatures, the ones who hid, who burrowed, who remembered the warmth, survived. The mammals rose from the ashes. They spread across the empty world, quick, adaptable, alive. Their children grew stronger, smarter. They learned to hunt in packs, to care for one another, to think, and in time, from these quiet survivors came new shapes, apes, then thinkers, then dreamers. The forests changed again, no longer the green cathedrals of the ancient world, but smaller, more fragile. The world cooled. Ice crept down from the poles. The first humans walked through a land of winds and memory. They carried no claws, no armor, only curiosity and fire. They were the last children of that ancient dream. And through them, the earth began to remember itself, because for the first time, one of its creations could look back. When humans looked at the stars, they were seeing the same sky that watched the first oceans form. When they built fire, they were lighting the ancient sun that lived in the forests of the Carboniferous. When they dreamed, they were echoing the same dream that began in a drop of water 4 billion years ago. The dream had never stopped, it had only changed shape. Now, Every heartbeat, every breath, every story we tell is part of that same long memory. The memory of a planet that once slept, then woke, then dreamed of us. We are not separate from the earth. We are its continuation, its consciousness made flesh. The stones beneath our feet are the bones of forgotten worlds. The air we breathe was made by forests that burned before time had a name. And the oceans still carry the salt of that first cell that divided and began it all. So when you look up tonight, remember, you are not looking into the future. You are looking into the oldest story ever told, a story of fire and water, of death and rebirth, of silence, learning to speak. We are the dream that began before memory, the children of ash and sky and the earth, still turning beneath the stars, is not done dreaming yet.